Hello, board game brothers and sisters. I'm Adam Singer, and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new here, we do this every single week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements, but I don't really have anything for this week, so I just want to give a quick mention to Alex over at BoardGameCo, because him and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns, and if you do like this sort of content, you'll definitely want to check out his channel as well. I don't have too much else to say this week other than the games are picking up again. We do have quite a bit more games this week than we did last week, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on August 25th, and this one is called Kitchen Chaos. And this one's either a head-to-head or team versus team worker placement game where players are going to be racing to complete orders first in order to cash in those victory points. The way the game works is that there's going to be a main board with all the different action locations that players will be using to take their actions, but then underneath the board you're going to have a bunch of different order cards outlining the ingredients and recipe that you need in order to complete that order. Each order could also have some specific cooking instructions as well. For example, with this burger, it does need to be grilled twice. And then, of course, each one of these will give you some amount of victory points. The game plays over a series of rounds, and each player is going to get 2 workers to perform their actions with each and every round. And the different action locations that you can visit are the pantry, where you can go ahead and collect a certain amount of cards from the various food groups. The bake, grill, or fry station, which will grant you a token that you'll be able to put on your food to signify that it has been baked, grilled, or fried. You can also use an action to assemble your cards into a specific dish and then adding it to the recipe slot on your board. And then if you have a completed recipe on your board and it also matches one of the orders out on the table, then you can also use an action to serve that order to that customer in order to score those victory points. And there is also an action that you can use to increase the value of the orders that you're able to complete, and that is the soup action space. And you'll be able to add a soup token to any of the orders that you complete in order to increase its victory points by 1. But the fun doesn't stop there, because there are some ways that you can get in the way of your opponents. And the first way is that the fry, bake, and grill spaces are actually blocking, which means that you can only have 1 meeple at that location at a time. So if you really want to use that location, or if you just want to block your opponents from being able to use it, you'll want to get there first. There are also the trap cards that you're going to gain in addition to your ingredients anytime that you visit the pantry, and the trap cards are special ability cards that you'll be able to deploy in order to get in the way of your opponents by messing with some of the actions they perform or making them overcook the recipe maybe just a little too much. It is called Kitchen Chaos after all, and these trap cards are going to allow for each team to equally get into the other team's way. But if this one sounds interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. Launching on August 26th, we have Moon, Death, and Dragons, and this is going to be offering you 4 different dice games that all allow the players to start with 20 gold, and then every round you're going to be putting some amount of your gold into the pool, either trying to win the overall pool or trying to get rid of all your gold. The first game is called Moon Dice, where players are going to be paying 1 gold into the pot each round in order to roll their 4 dice. Players can also pay 1 gold for each die that they want to re-roll, and then the player with the best combination of 3 dice wins the pot, and the game continues like this until one player has all the gold. And then we have Parrot and Dragon, where players are going to be paying their gold each round in order to roll 3 dice, and then there are certain rolls that will cause you to add even more gold into the pool, but your goal here is to try and roll a pair, and if you are able to do that, you're going to roll a 4th die to try and roll a dragon in order to win the pot. The next game is called Kingdom Tax, where each player is going to be assigned to a symbol on a die, and then players are going to be taking turns rolling 3 dice, contributing gold for each time that your symbol rolls. First player to get rid of all their gold first wins the game. And then finally we have Dead or Alive, where each player is going to be given a token that represents one side of a die, and then players will pay gold for each round that they play, and then all players are going to be rolling 4 dice. If you don't get a pair, then you are eliminated from the round, and the last player standing wins the pool of gold, but once per game you can spend your token as a die in order to make a matching pair with whatever you rolled. If you're interested to learn more, they do have videos outlining how each of the individual games play, and I will have a link to the campaign down below, and of course you can click to get notified. And launching on August 27th, we have Lords of Heaven. And this one looks like a really solid area control game where you're going to be using cards in order to take control over different regions out on the board. Thematically, this is taking place during the Crusades, and you're going to have different Muslim or Christian factions that players are going to be playing as. And each player is going to have their own player board, which is going to outline 3 different building types. And you're going to be using this to keep track of your different building tokens and how much you've upgraded each type. Players will also get a player shield that they'll be able to use to hide all the different resources and tokens. And in this game, all the players' player boards are exactly the same. There's no asymmetry there, but instead the amount of tokens that you get to start with and your location out on the board will be variable depending on who you're playing as. So that is where the asymmetry is going to be coming into play. But the game plays over 2 phases, which each can last anywhere from 6 to 8 rounds, depending on a card draw, because you are going to have a randomized deck that's going to be determining the number of rounds for each phase. Players are going to be drafting cards at the start of the game until they have 4 cards to choose from, and there are a bunch of different cards offered in this game, and they can be used in a whole variety of different ways. But anytime that you use one of these cards from this moment forward, you're just going to be drawing another card from the deck. Each round, you're going to be playing your cards into these different action locations in order to gain the benefit of that card and then also gain access to that specific action. Like I said, these cards have a whole bunch of different uses to them, and you might notice that they have different resources on the top of the card and different resources on the bottom, and those come into play depending on whether you decide to play your card to one of the top actions or one of the bottom actions. The resources that are shown there represent the resources that you're either going to have to pay or gain, depending on which action location you use with that card. What's cool about this is that it's the action space that determines whether you're gaining or losing resources, but then it's the card that determines which type of resources and how many that you're going to be gaining or losing. Not only that, but these cards will also overlap with any cards that were previously played at that location, and you're going to be combining the resources between the cards together. If the icon on the card also matches your faction, then you're also going to be able to gain access to the special ability of that card. And there are a bunch of different actions that you can perform. There's the income action that's going to gain you an amount of income depending on what buildings you have out on the board. Or you can also discard a card in order to gain a certain amount of resources. And there's also an action that allows you to place one of your influence tokens out on the city side of one of the location boards. And the way that this works is that anytime that you put a token out on the city side, it's going to be pushing any other tokens in its way further to the left, potentially knocking them off the board. This, of course, means that you want to be further to the right of the influence board, which is going to help you stay on there just a little bit easier. And you can pay additional gold in order to do that. The right side of the board is where players are going to be placing their support tokens, and there is an action to do that, but to be able to do this, you do also need to have influence in that region. And this becomes useful during a battle, which is another action, and whenever you do that, you're going to be declaring where and who you are attacking, and then you'll be able to ask for any allies that are there to support you, but your opponent is able to do the same. And then each player can also pay additional gold in order to take units from adjacent regions and pull them into that region. And then the attacker and defender will both be simultaneously revealing one of their cards, resolving its effect, and then adding any additional tokens and rolling dice based on any support that they have at that region. The side with the most strength at the end of a battle wins the battle, and that's going to be gaining the winner and their allies additional victory points. Another thing to note here is that players with support at a region can also use that support to attack the city, and they're going to be choosing a player to attack in the city section. And the way that this works is almost identical to the way that I just described, with the biggest difference being that players can't move additional units into that region. But there still are some other actions that players can perform outside of these battles, and the next one is the movement action, which allows you to pay in order to move any amount of units from one region to an adjacent region. And of course the build action, which will allow you to spend resources in order to build the different buildings out on the different areas on the board, and these can help you maintain influence in a region, they can earn you more income for an income action, or they can help you gain more units for combat. The game continues like this over the first phase until those 6 to 8 rounds are completed, and then you're going to be moving into a mid-game scoring, where players are going to be gaining points for the different locations that they were able to control at that point in the game. And then you're going to be adding a few new locations onto the board, and then moving into the second phase, which is going to be playing identical to the first, and then you're going to be doing an additional scoring at the end of the game. and the player with the most victory points at that time wins the game. And if you're interested, check this one out. I will have it linked down below. Also, launching on the 27th, we have Natera New Beginning, and this one is a competitive game where players are playing as animals, which are moving out from the forest in order to take control of the four corners of the human city. There's 5 different locations where you can take actions, with the center location representing the forest where players will be starting from. Players are going to be using their actions to explore those different regions in order to move up on the authority track for that region. The reason that that's important is because only players with enough authority at a region will be able to use the action spaces at that region. And also, as you move up that authority track, more and more of the action locations at that region will be uncovered, with most of them starting face down at the start of the game. But the locations that you explore will also determine the type of resources that you get. And you're going to be spending those resources to complete different exploration cards for either a one-time or ongoing ability. And each of these cards will have different iconography that you'll be able to collect in order to augment other actions in the future or to gain additional bonuses. Some of the other actions will allow you to do different things like spend resources in order to build settlements at one of your locations. And this is going to gain you a bonus anytime that another player uses that location. And many of the other actions will allow you to convert resources into other resources or even into food, which is really nice to have because there's also an action that allows you to purchase these specialist cards. And of course, to get these different animal specialists on your side, you do have to pay them with food. And these are a really cool aspect of the game, and I think it's my favorite part of the game, and that's that each of these specialist cards are going to be coming with their own special ability, which will just introduce a whole variety of ways that you can strategize in this game and offer a ton of different paths to victory. Players will also have a skill tree that they'll be trying to move throughout the game in order to gain additional benefits, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you do want to learn more about this one, I will have it linked down below. And of course, you can click that Notify Me button to get notified once this one launches. Also launching on August 27th, we have Amoebunnies, and this is a competitive game where each player is going to be playing as a completely different character that each has its own movement pattern, as well as its own objectives that it's trying to complete in order to win the game. What I also really like about this game is that for each of these, the creator did provide a crochet pattern on their website that you can go ahead and check out and crochet your favorite little character. Players are going to be taking turns performing any amount of actions on their turn, but in order to perform most of these actions, you do normally have to spend a card. Players start with 3 cards at the beginning of the game, and each card will have 2 different halves on it representing a different region on the board. And these are all going to be color-coded, but essentially what it means is that you can spend one of those cards in order to end your movement in one of those regions. Like I said before, each character does have their own specific movement pattern, so depending on the character that you're playing as, the cards you have in your hand could give you completely different options from game to game. Some of the characters' objectives might also require them to try and collect different sets of these cards in order for them to win the game. And some of the cards might also show a jelly icon, which essentially makes that card act as a wild, and you can use it to move into any region of the board. But also you can choose to just discard that card in order to gain a jelly. The jellies are nice because they allow you to add additional spaces to your unique movement pattern, and they can also act as any color for any objectives that require you to collect certain sets. Some other characters may have specific tokens which have to be placed or collected in order to achieve their objectives. For example, one character has been split into multiple parts, and that character needs to go ahead and collect its pieces in order to merge itself back together, whereas another character actually can create tunnels and shortcuts out on the board, and her objective involves collecting samples through experimentation, and these tunnels help her move more efficiently between the different locations to help her complete that goal. But there's a ton of different characters that all modify the game in their very own way, and if you do want to check each of them out and learn more about this game, you can go ahead and find a link to it in the description down below. Also launching on the 27th, we have a new expansion for the game Quest Kids, and this one is called Realms of the Kingdom. This is going to be introducing a new playable character into the game, but this character has also enlisted the help from the other Quest Kids in order to help save his kingdom. In order to do that, players are going to have to collect the 4 different gems from 4 different realms, and this expansion introduces a bunch of different portals that players will be able to utilize in order to help them jump between those different realms. There's going to be a dragon realm, a pirate's realm, a magical creatures realm, and then of course your standard realm. But if you're not familiar with the original Quest Kids, this is a really awesome game to play with younger kids. The way this game works is that each player is going to be playing as their own character, but then the main board is going to be set up with a bunch of different cards that players are going to be moving onto and resolving, with the green cards always giving some sort of positive benefit, which will usually be different types of resources or treasure. The gray cards are a little bit more risky, but can also offer you better rewards. And then, of course, the red cards will offer you the best rewards, but are also the most difficult monsters to battle. Whenever you do uncover a monster, you're going to have to discard the resources matching the icons on that card. And if you're able to do that, you defeat the monster and you gain the rewards, which is usually some amount of victory points. But if you don't have the required resources in order to defeat that monster, that could end up costing you one of your hit points, but luckily you do have another option here, and that is to ask the other players at the table for some of their resources in order for them to help you defeat this monster. This is good for you because it means you don't lose a hit point and you can gain the rewards of defeating that monster, but anyone who was willing to help out also gains a kind kid card, which can grant them with all sorts of special abilities or bonuses. Players do have a limited amount of hit points in this game, and if your health goes to 0, you're not eliminated, but you do skip a turn in order to get one of your hit points back, and your hit points are worth victory points at the end of the game, so you are interested in keeping all of them. The game ends once all the cards have been explored, and then players are going to be adding up their victory points from their defeated monsters and any treasures or cards that also grant them victory points. And then finally, each player would have had a quest given to them at the start of the game, and if they were able to also complete that, then they would gain those victory points as well. And it's the player with the most victory points at that point that wins the game. And if you are interested to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. And of course, you can click that Notify Me button in order to get notified once this one launches. Also launching on the 27th, we have a Nice Cuppa, and this one is the next solo game coming from Button Shy Games. And this one is also designed by Scott Elms, and this game is all about enjoying a nice cup of tea and forgetting about all your worries. Just like with most Button Shy games, this one isn't a table hog or anything like that. It's only going to be comprised of a small deck of cards, which is easy to transport in this handy little card wallet. And I do want to thank the publisher here because they were kind enough to send me a prototype copy of the game, and this is what it looks like all set up. Basically, there's two different types of cards offered in this game. There are your T cards, and they come in two different forms. They are either in their focus state, which is represented by this beige teapot at the top of the card. Then there is the distracted side, which of course has a red teapot. But at the start of the game, you're just going to be shuffling all these and putting the focus side face up. And then underneath them, you're going to be shuffling the other cards, which are known as the worry cards. And you're going to be putting a 1 under each of those T cards. One thing to note is that there are other T cards offered in the game, so you're only going to be using a subset of them whenever you play, which is going to add a little bit of variety from game to game. But the actual goal in this game is to try and score as many victory points as possible. And the way that you're going to be doing that is by trying to get these cards in sequential order with the 1 all the way on the left. And that's going to make any of the cards that are in order worth at least 1 victory point. But if they're also on their focus side, then they're going to be worth 2 victory points. You are also trying to get rid of these worry cards at the bottom here, and any that are still left over at the end of the game are going to be subtracting 1 point from your final score. The game gives you 8 turns in order to try and manipulate these cards and get them in order, as well as get rid of those worry cards, and at the start of each turn, you're always going to be choosing 1 worry card to flip over to its other side. And in this case, I am worried about aging. Yes, sometimes this game does hit close to home. But now that I've flipped that card, the next thing I'm going to do is resolve each worry card that is face up from left to right. Since I only have 1 face-up card right now, I'm only going to resolve this one, which does instruct me to swap a pair with any other pair. In this game, a pair means any 2 cards that are side by side, and if that referred to a group, that would be any 3 cards that are side by side. I think in this case, I'm going to try and get my 2 and my 3 as close to the left as possible, so I'm going to be swapping these 2 pairs. And then what happens is any T cards that are above a worry card are going to get flipped to their other side, which makes them distracted. And the only way to get rid of a worry card is to have a focused T card above it at this point in your turn, which means that if I left these cards exactly as they were for my following turn, then I would come back to this point, which would cause me to flip any cards above a worry card, which would include this card, which would flip it back to its focus side. And then since it is now at its focus side, that would eliminate this card. Of course, that hasn't happened yet, so I'll just put these back to the way that they were. You can kind of see how this creates the goal of trying to get the distracted T cards above the worry cards. At the end of your turn, you can optionally swap any 2 cards that are adjacent to each other, and I do have this 2 and 3 out of order, so I'll just go ahead and swap those cards. And this moves us into the second turn, where I'll just go ahead and flip this worry card, which allows me to move a pair to any other spot in the line. But you also need to remember that these are going to be resolving from left to right, which means that I have to do that action, and then I have to do the aging action again. And I don't know if this makes sense, but I think I'm going to move this 5 and 1 and swap it with this 4 and the 3. And I know I completely messed up the sequence that I had earlier, but I know on my next turn I am going to be doing these 2 actions again, plus another one, so I'm not too worried about messing it up right now. Let's just go ahead and continue with this turn. Any cards that are above one of the worry cards are going to be flipped over to the other side. And then I can optionally swap 2 cards, and I think I'm just going to swap these 2 to get them back in order. And for the next card flip, I think I'm going to flip this one because it is under a card that's in its distracted state, which will allow this one to get removed easier, I hope. This one wants me to move a group of 3 cards to another spot in the line, but of course we do have to go in sequential order here, so let's do the financial card first. And I'm going to use that to shift these 2 cards over to the right here. And then to move the group of 3, I'm going to shift all these 3 to the left, which is going to send this 4 into the spot it needs to be. And then the aging again, which requires me to swap 1 pair with another pair. And I think I'm just going to swap these 2 pairs right now because I know on my future turn I'm still going to have the financial card, which is going to force me to move a pair to another spot. So I could just do that to shift these back. The other nice thing about doing this is that all these cards are going to now flip to the opposite side, and that's not great for these 2 cards, but at least for this number 7, it's going to flip back to its focus side, which also gets rid of this worry card. Once again, I can optionally swap 2 cards, so I'm just going to swap these 2 here. Let's just go ahead and flip the next card here, which allows me to choose a group of 3 and swap the first card with the last card in that group. So first things first, let's use the financial card to slide this pair over like I said I would, which would then put these in order. And then I have to choose a group of 3 and swap the first card and the last card of the group. I'm going to choose this group, which is going to put the 3 in the right spot and the 2 over there. And then for the last action, I have to move any group of 3 to another spot in the line. I think what I'm going to do here is just slide these 3 over, because now that these cards are above those worry cards, they're going to get flipped to their focused side, which then causes these cards to get removed. And then I'm not going to swap any 2 cards here, so let's just go ahead and flip the next card. And this one's interesting because it requires me to choose a pair and then send the left card to the start and the right card to the end. But first I do have to move a pair to another spot in the line, which isn't going to help me out too much with this next action. But I guess what I could do is slide these 2 cards all the way over here, which would slide these 2 back. But now I at least have 2 of these red cards side by side. So when I go ahead and do this action to choose a pair, which is going to send this card all the way to the start, and this card all the way to the end. Sure, everything's way out of order, but at least I have 2 red cards above 2 face-up worry cards, which is then going to cause those cards to flip back over. And then these 2 cards will now get discarded. And I am going to take advantage of my card swapping, so we'll do that at the end of that turn. And you probably get an idea of how the game plays so far, but I'm just going to keep playing through this because I am having fun doing it, and we only have 2 more cards left here to flip, so let's go ahead and flip this next one. And this one allows me to swap a pair with a single card to the left or right of that pair. And I really want to get this one over to the left, so I'm going to go ahead and swap that pair with the 1. And that's it, so let's go ahead and flip this card to its other side. And then I'll go ahead and use my optional swap in order to swap these 2 cards. Things are looking pretty good here so far with me knowing that I have this action coming up here. So let's see what my last action is, and this is to swap an odd-numbered card with an even-numbered card. And I think that might have been exactly what I needed, because that allows me to go ahead and flip the 6 with the 7. Then I can go ahead and use this card to swap any pair with a single card beside it, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that puts all the cards in sequential order, but unfortunately I am going to have to flip these 2 cards since there's still a worry card below them. The game ends once you have no more face-down worry cards to reveal, which is the case right now, which means that we just go ahead and move into scoring. Since all the cards are in sequential order, I do get to keep all of them, but if that wasn't the case, The ones that were out of order would need to be discarded. Let's go ahead and put those back how they were, and we'll add up the score here. So I have 4 face-up focused T cards, which are worth 2 points each, so that gives me 8. And then I have these distracted cards, which are all worth 1, so that is going to give me 11 points. Unfortunately, I do still have 2 worry cards, which are minus a point each, which puts me at a victory point total of 9. And if you're wondering where that puts me in terms of success, the game actually offers 2 modes of play. There's the standard mode and the hard mode. And I always play everything on the hard mode. And 9 points would just put me at a focused win. Nothing too fancy here, but I'll definitely do better next time. And that's how you play a Nice Cuppa, a really solid solo game that I had a lot of fun playing here. I'll be hanging on to this one, and if it did look like a lot of fun to you as well, you can go ahead and check it out. I'll have it linked down below. Also on the 27th, we have Idols Clash, which is a competitive card game that I don't have a whole lot of info on, but I did cover it in the past with the info I do have, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. We have Idols Clash, which is a card game where players are going to be building up their own K-pop group and then trying to win different challenges and do different shows in order to gain victory points, while also using special action cards in order to help themselves and harm their opponents. Not a whole lot of info on this one right now, but if you are interested, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. And of course, you can click that follow button to get notified once it launches. Also on the 27th, we have a couple new expansions for the game Pest. And these new expansions are going to be the Guild Hall expansion and the Clusters expansion. These are both individual modules that you can just mix into the game. If you're not familiar with how the base game plays, I have covered it in the past, and I'll roll that previous footage for you in a second here. But the Guild Halls expansion is going to be adding a new type of unit that each player is going to have in each of the 5 different guilds. On your turn, you'll be able to spend influence in order to advance any of your units up the different tiers within that guild. These can grant you with different abilities and bonuses, but you can also gain additional victory points at the end of the game, depending on how far your unit was up in the ranks within each guild. The cluster module introduces a little bit of semi-cooperative play, as there's going to be different strains of viruses appearing in the different cities, and these can cause additional sick people to appear within those cities. And an individual player can go ahead and get rid of one of those tokens by spending 2 research tokens, as well as taking a research action. But if there are 2 players with their plague doctors in that location, they can agree to work together and get rid of that cluster token for free, which also gains them 3 influence immediately. During the final stage of the game, a cluster token will spawn in the capital city, which is going to be spawning sick people to all locations adjacent to that city, which can really ramp up the amount that players are going to have to deal with. But if this sounds interesting to you, there's also going to be a second edition of the game that's going to fix a couple issues with the original printing. And if you do want to know how the base game plays, I'll just go ahead and play that previous footage for you now. And this is a competitive game where players are leaders of different houses in an empire that's been struck by plague. And players are going to be competing to build up the empire back to its former glory, gaining victory points and renown for their contributions towards doing so. Players are going to be taking turns placing workers on their own personal player board in order to perform actions, and the different actions you can perform are to harvest different resources, spend those resources to build different buildings, move your containment teams around on the board in order to cure and quarantine different people, and then you can also assign your healthy population to work in your constructed buildings or send them as diplomats in the capital city in order to gain influence and bring additional benefits. But the thing that I really like about this game and what makes it really unique is the way that the action selection works, because each player is going to have their own action selection grid on their own personal player board, and you're going to be putting your worker in one of those locations on the grid, and that's going to allow you to perform 2 different actions. All your actions are going to be associated with either a row or column along the top or side of this grid, and wherever you put your worker within those rows and columns dictates the 2 actions that you have access to. Of course, each worker is also going to take up a spot on that grid, so you're only going to be able to get that combination once in a round. The players can also upgrade these actions throughout the game as they build different buildings and research different technologies, creating multiple paths to victory, but then also creating a bit of an engine that's going to ramp up until the end of the game. Players will get all sorts of different benefits for doing all this, but of course rebuilding the city and curing it of the plague will all gain you victory points, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. Also launching on the 27th, we have Sneferu, Builders of the Pyramids. And this one is a competitive game where players are going to be sailing down the Nile River, collecting blocks and trying to build the biggest pyramid for their pharaoh. This one also looks like a game that's going to offer a lot of fun decisions to players without a whole lot of rules overhead, and for that reason, this one is my own personal pick of the week. The main board is going to be tracking the player order as well as the end of the game, because each player is going to have their own boat token out on this board, and you're all going to be starting at the beginning in the bottom right corner here, and the game ends once all of the players' boats have reached the end. When it comes to determining whose current turn it is, you're always going to be checking which player's boat is furthest behind, and if there's a tie, you're going to be seeing which boat is furthest to the right. In this case, it would be the red player's turn, and on your turn, you always do have to buy a block. And you're going to have this offer board that has a bunch of different blocks at different prices. There is a base cost for each column outlined at the top here, and then there is an additional cost for each of the individual rows depending on which column you're choosing. As you can see, all the different blocks do have different symbols, and this is just randomized by drawing these blocks out of a bag, and anytime that a block is purchased, you will be replacing it with a new block from the bag. The brown icon represents food, while the white icon represents time, and paying for these is a really cool aspect of the game, because in order to pay for time, all you gotta do is move your boat that many spaces up the board. You do need to be careful with this, because once you reach the end of the board, you're not going to be able to add any more blocks to your pyramid, and the game has essentially ended for you. In order to pay the food requirements of a cost, you just have to have that amount in your supply in order to discard, but the cool thing about the food is the way that you get it. And this is where the icons on the blocks really start to matter, because anytime you gain a block, you're going to be putting it on your pyramid from bottom to top, trying to match those icons so that you're creating adjacencies between the various blocks. This is going to be creating groups of icons out on your board, and once a group of icons is completely cut off from its surroundings and you're not able to add any more to that group, it's going to be granting you some amount of food depending on how big you were able to make that group. I really like this because it means you want to make that group as big as possible to get as much food as possible, but then also you don't want to let that go on too long if you're running out of food, so you might just want to close off one of the groups in order to cash that in for the food that you need to take your next action. One other important detail out on the main board is that there are some spaces that are color-coded, and they do also have a token associated with them. And what this means is that if you are on that space at the start of your turn, if you're able to also buy a block that has a color matching that space, then you will also gain the bonus that that space has to offer. This usually comes in the form of granting you some sort of discount when you're going to purchase that block. But the game continues like this until all the players have reached the end of the board, and then you're going to be seeing which player has the most blocks completed on their pyramid. Then that player is going to win the game, and if there is a tie, then you're going to be seeing who has the most food tokens. But I'm really interested in this one. It looks like it could be a lot of fun and really easy to get to the table, and if you are interested in it as well, make sure you go ahead and follow along with it, because it will give you a €2 discount. And launching on the 28th, we have the Legendary Box for the game Barrage, which is going to include all the expansions and content released for the game so far. But it's also going to be including 2 brand new companies that you'll be able to mix into the game that have some very different characteristics from any of the other companies that you can play in the game currently. But this is also a game that I did cover in the past, so if you do want to learn more about this one and understand how the game actually plays, I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And in this game, players are going to be using the power of water to compete to build up their energy empire. Each player is going to be starting with their own character ability, as well as an assistant that also adds another ability, which you'll be able to mix together in different ways from game to game. But this is a game that plays over a number of rounds, and at the start of each round, players are going to be placing their workers out on the main board or their own personal player board in order to perform a variety of different actions with the goal of building different machinery out on the main map in order to process water as it comes down the different channels, because also at the start of each round, there's going to be new water tokens getting put at the highest elevation out on the board. And these are going to trickle down the different channels, be controlled by different dams and machinery that players are able to build, hopefully being processed in order to generate some energy for one player or another, and eventually making their way off the board. The game plays over 5 rounds, and like I said, players are going to be placing their workers, and if you want to place workers on your own player board, this is going to allow you to unlock new machines that you'll be able to put out on the main board. Each of the machines is also going to have a resource cost associated with it, but the number of workers that you need to build a particular piece of machinery is going to increase every time you build that specific type. This makes building the same type of machinery more difficult as the game goes on, but you are able to use that machinery immediately, and when you do, you're going to be putting the associated tokens out on your own personal dial, and you won't be able to use that machinery again until it makes a full rotation. The nice thing is that this gets rotated anytime that you either build a machine or use an action that gives you a free rotation on this dial. Like I said, the main board also has a bunch of different action spots as well, and you can use these action locations in order to do things like gain contracts that you can complete to gain victory points or additional boosts, resources, or upgrades. You can also use it to get more machines in a different path. You can use it to get additional spins on your dial, gain additional money, or add more water to the board, in addition to the water that gets added at the start of the round. But of course, the grand objective here is to generate energy, and there is an action for that. And when you do that, it's going to allow you to move water tokens throughout the main board. Each of the different machinery types and buildings will have different effects, giving you different options as you're moving the water throughout the board. For example, the dam does allow you to hold water in a reservoir for processing later, and you are able to stack your dams, allowing you to hold one additional amount of water for each dam that you're able to stack. Depending on the machinery you have, as well as the channels that you're going to be directing the water through, you're going to be earning a certain amount of energy, which is going to be granting you victory points. And of course, it's not just your machinery out on the board, there are other players' colors as well, and there are some ways that you can use your opponent's machinery, but they do get some benefit from that. This is a game that has been out for several years now and has stood the test of time, with it getting a ton of positive reviews as well as a really nice rating on BGG, so this one is my own personal pick of the week. I think it takes a really unique approach to the Eurogame genre with the way that the water flows through the board and the way that players are able to interact with it. And that whole dial mechanism isn't something that I see too often, and it's really interesting how it limits the amount that you'll be able to activate your machinery out on the main board, making it really important with how you time activating your machinery with the water that is trickling down through the channels. And I'll be honest, I was a little hesitant to make this one my pick of the week just because it's not adding a whole lot of changes to the core game. It's just going to be adding a couple maps. I'm sure there'll be a lot of surprises in the campaign as well, and I hope to see that. But honestly, expansions don't have to be giant heaping changes to the game, and I do kind of like things that I can just throw in, even when I just get started in a game. I think this does fit that build. And for a game that's been out for a while like this one has, I think these boards are going to be a great way to allow players to change up their strategy without completely changing the way that the game plays. But like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if each of these maps also brings in a few of their own mechanisms as well. But if you want to know for sure, you'll have to check out the campaign, and I will have a link for that in the description below. And of course, you can click to get notified. And this next campaign is launching on the 30th, and this one is an expansion to the game F1 Roll and Race, and this one's called the World Circuits. I just found out about this one, so I wasn't able to look into it in my usual amount of detail. This one looks like a roll and write where players are going to be racing through different circuits, and you can even combine the circuits together into a full championship. Each of the races are going to be featuring different types of cars that all operate a little bit differently, and players are going to be using their dice to upgrade their car, move through the racetrack, and repair any damages. It looks like the way the game plays is that there's going to be dice rolled each and every round, and then each player is going to be drafting from one of those dice. But if you choose a red die, you're also going to be suffering a breakdown. But if you choose the green die, you will also get an upgrade. This means that players will have to decide not only which pip values are most valuable to them, but also at the cost or benefit of the die, depending on if it's a red one or a green one. There's a ton of videos on their campaign page if you do want to learn more, so if this one does look interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I'll have it linked down below. And that's everything I have for you this week, and it's at this point in the video where I would normally do some sort of giveaway, but I guess I did too many last week because I don't have any left for this week. The games are picking up, so there should be more in the coming weeks, but let's just go ahead and draw the winners from last week's giveaways, which was for a pledge for One Deck Dungeon, as well as Gnome Village, and we're going to draw for One Deck Dungeon first. In order to do that, I use this application here, and all these extra names down here are bonus entries for my members over on Ko-fi. I do all this work for free, and I don't charge publishers money or require them to send me any games. So all the support here really does make a difference in helping make these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me. If you are interested in that, I will have it linked in the description, but let's just go ahead and draw those comments. And let's try that again. Perfect, and this one is for one deck dungeons, so let's go ahead and draw our winner. And the winner is Taco Pizza Bob, which is one of the supporters over on Ko-fi. Thanks so much for all the support. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a sweet pledge here, but now let's go ahead and draw for Gnome Village. We're going to do the exact same thing here. Go ahead and update this hashtag to Gnome and draw the winner. And the winner of Gnome Village is Dirk Hauer, who is also a member over on Ko-fi. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a sweet pledge here. And that's everything for this week. I hope there was something in there that looked interesting to you. And as always, thanks so much for tuning in. And until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
What?